You're listening to Go Podcast Yourself Network.
Let's go check it out
at gopodcastyourself.com. And we love you.
Consciousness is a dream that I pursue.
He fumbles at your spirit as players at the keys. Before they drop full music on, he stuns you by degrees.
Consciousness is a dream that I pursue. Come, sealing night, scarf up the tender eye of pitiful day. Light thickens and the crow makes wing to the rooky wood. Good things of day begin to droop and drowse, whilst night's black agents to their praise do rouse. Thou marvelst at my words, but hold thee still.
This is Twilight on the Western Door. Sator, Aripo, Tenet, Opera, Rotas. Consciousness
is a dream that I pursue. Hi, this is Mason Winfield, the host of Twilight on the Western Door, our program of discussions and interviews with cutting-edge scholars into the roots of the spiritual, the supernatural, and the paranormal. Today we're taking a little walk into the twilight, this time into the subject of occultism. I'll begin with a quick explanation that we haven't done a show in a couple of weeks. It's not because we're getting tired of you all, it's because we're all busy. Had a few things come up, but for now, for today's program, I'll begin by paraphrasing an introduction from one of the chapters of my first book, Shadows of the Western Door. As a general term, Illuminatus, plural Illuminati, has always meant someone who has awakened in some sense, mystical, philosophical, or religious, from the largely unspeculative, materialistic tenor of everyday life. Illuminated can also describe someone exposed to the mysticism of the Western secret tradition, known as the Hermetic Kabbalist tradition, involving groups like the Templars, the Rosicrucians, and the inner circles of the Freemasons. Most specifically, the Illuminati, the Enlightened Ones, were a secret anarchical society probably founded by a young German law professor, Adam Weishaupt, in 1776. Like author Neil Wilgus, we use the term Illuminoid/Illuminati in the broadest sense to refer to someone who fits into one of the above categories. Today's discussion, The Invisible College of the Rosy Cross, concerns itself with one of the most influential societies and philosophies of the last 400 years, the Rosicrucians. You don't hear much about it on today's TV ghost hunting shows, but there's a vast literature and a whole mythology about the secret societies. Though this may seem more the domain of the conspiracy club, paranormal buffs get interested sometimes too. It may look like a reach, but in the lore concerning some secret societies are associated with magic, sacred magical objects like the Holy Grail, UFOs, religious secrets, dark powers past mortal comprehension, and just about anything else potentially crazy. Oh, and they have philosophy at their roots. One of the occult undercurrents concerns the deep interest the European secret societies had in the founding of the United States. To the unsatisfied of the old world, the young nation in the new land represented the last chance on the planet to begin again and create a perfect human society, perhaps as proof that humanity was, in any sense, perfectible. Mystical folklore attaches to the seminal events of the new republic. Sacred architecture is widely evident in our capital city, Washington, D.C. Ambiguous mystical symbols are visible in our dollar bill. The Great Seal of the United States is just one of them. Most of the founding fathers, Washington, Franklin, and likely Jefferson, were Freemasons, possibly Rosicrucians, possibly Iroquois-influenced mystics, and according to some, illuminated. Throw in John and John Quincy Adams, maybe members of a top-secret geomantic druid outfit, the Order of the Dragon, should there be such a thing, and you get the picture. It's a tortuous tangle, all those theories about history, mysticism, conspiracy, and the secret societies. They lead everywhere, they never end, and it's hard to make any sense of them all. But we have with us today someone who can give responsible discussion and hopefully some clarity to the subject through his perspectives on the Rosicrucians. Dr. Hugh, Dr. Hugh McCague, are you ready to take a little walk into the twilight with us?
Very much so, Mason. Thank you.
I knew I had the man. Well, Hugh, as a brief little beginning here, could you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, your education, and how you got interested in the subject of the Rosy Cross?
Sure. My background is I'm a mathematician and a statistician, and I work in the Institute for Social Research at York University in Toronto. I've had a deep love for mathematics from a very young age, and partway through my teens, I became very interested in mysticism, which we'll talk some more about, and I had some very illuminative experiences, particularly when I was 19 years of age. And throughout my entire adult life, through seeking a spiritual quest, I very early on came across the Rosicrucian order, AMORC, and I was very attracted to its teachings, at which we can talk about. And it's been through that I've been a student and also give presentations for the Rosicrucian order. I've been an officer and written articles, and that's part of how we came into contact as well. So there's some basic background on me, Mason.
Yeah, as I recall, we had you and me and a couple of others had a real nice dinner up in East Aurora probably 10 or so years ago, and that was when I first met you, I believe. You're a good friend of a dear friend of mine, the late Kitty Turgeon.
Yes, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
Kitty and I often had good chances to talk about the Rosicrucian tradition and the Roycroft and the relationship. And Kitty was a member of or student of the Rosicrucian order as myself.
Oh, yeah. Hey, before we go on, I think it's possible that I made a bit of a mistake. And you tell me if I did or didn't, but I may have referred to Rosicrucianism under the blanket category of occultism. Was I, occultism doesn't mean Satanism at all. It's a very broad category. But yet, do you feel that I was proper in doing that?
In the broader, more enlightened sense of the use of the word occultism, I think you're quite right. I know sometimes people have the connotation of things that are not harmonious and not noble in purpose, but in the sense that, for example, an historian like Francis Yates uses the term of the occult philosophy of the Elizabethan age, that sense of occult philosophy, or looking at things that appear hidden. In that sense, it's akin to the ancient term, of course, of gnosis, of a hidden or revealed knowledge. And in that sense, the Rosicrucian order is meant to be a very strongly constructive organization with noble purposes. And in that sense, the occult is used in that sense. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear, because I have never felt that just because something was underground or hidden, that it was automatically bad. I mean, we just did a conference here in East Aurora where we had Native American speakers, we had African American speakers. They were all talking about mysticism and spirituality from their perspectives. We had a Buddhist monk. I was talking about Celtic spirituality. And some, kind of a conservative Christian group blackballed us. They put some post up their Facebook page because they thought we were engaging in something that would be satanic. And I mean, I'm not mad at them at all. I want to have a cup of coffee with them and sit down and say, listen, guys, I think you're hurting yourselves more than me, and we might be playing for the same team, I mean, elevating world spirituality is, I think, what we're trying to do, and I just don't feel like any one group has got the handle on it. But now would probably be a good time, Dr. Hugh, for you to tell us what is Rosicrucianism, what are its general philosophies, where did it begin? What do you got for us there?
Sure, I can mention a variety of things to you. I mean, it's a worldwide educational and philosophical organization, and I can emphasize it's not a religion. It has no fixed belief system or code of behavior that is imposed. However, persons who are religious will find that their understanding of their chosen religion or religion they grew up in will be enormously enhanced through understanding the Rosicrucian teachings and practices. I can also emphasize that questioning and independent thought are encouraged. We are to come to our own conclusion from our own experience. The acronym that goes after Rosicrucian order, AMORC, A-M-O-R-C, stands for Ancient Mystical Order of the Rosy Cross. And there's an emphasis, yes, there's ancient wisdom, but it's added to over time with knowledge and developments. And the Rosicrucian order can be viewed as a school. And in a very practical way, you receive one lesson at a time that's studied in the home, and it's a very gradual, systematic development and self-discovery. Even if one's been studying things to do with mysticism and spirituality for many years, it's still good to go at a very gradual pace. And the topics covered are very broad-ranging and comprehensive. We've talked about philosophy. It's review of philosophy. It's emphasis of philosophy in the sense of its original meaning of the love of wisdom. Natural and spiritual laws are covered in a very comprehensive way. The meaning and purpose of life, methods of healing, meditation, visualization, all practically orientated to achieving well-being, mastery of living, and increasing one's capacity to be helpful in service to others. I can emphasize that service is extremely important. There are many inspiring experiences one has in mysticism, but it's always to be done or given back in a practical way. And when I use the term mysticism, we can clarify there, just as we talked about occultism, let's clarify some of the meaning of mysticism. In that, I'm referring to the art and science of love. You can also look at it as a capacity to experience the God within. Again, we say the true teacher or the ultimate teacher is within us. In the Rosicrucian order, we don't emphasize particular personalities or teachers. So mysticism can be viewed as that direct experience of reality. And the answers to life's questions are already within us. And the Rosicrucian order would assist the student in drawing out those answers from within. The order we do not view as secretive, it does have a private element, just as organizations generally do. And in earlier time periods, there was often more prejudicial viewpoints towards the humans seeking for deeper understanding, and sometimes had to be more private than others. Today, you can find, look us up in the phone book. You can look at our website and so forth. There's a department of instruction that we have where, while we don't emphasize particular personalities or teachers, there are very experienced people one can ask questions from. There's many local affiliated groups throughout the world, including the United States, and that's sort of a special feature to be with people of like mind and ask questions to who've had a lot of experience. And also, people who start their studies in the Rosicrucian order are under no obligation to continue, and no one will call on them. And there's an introductory booklet that's called Mastery of Life that goes over a lot of these points, as well as our website, which I can give later if you wish.
Sure. Some of the, I know I'm talking to a fine scholar right now, but there's some other fine scholars. Francis Yates, whom you mentioned a little bit earlier, but yes. I think Christopher McIntosh wrote a book
yes.
on the Rosicrucians. I think both of them sort of have the idea that the Rosicrucians cannot be tracked before the 1600s, that as far as those guys are concerned, the original manifestos came out, shorthanded, the Fama and the Confessio, but the long and the short of it is that somebody in Germany, I'm not sure we figured out who, put out sort of kind of inspirational combination of an ad, a help wanted ad,
yes.
and talked about this secret group of illuminated philosophers and called upon other geniuses to join them. And a bunch of prominent people thought, boy, that's fantastic. But they couldn't find any Rosicrucians to talk to. I think no less than Francis Bacon, the great British philosopher, and even René Descartes, the French philosopher.
Yes.
They
yes.
tried to find the Rosicrucian. They came to the conclusion that the lights are on, but there's nobody home.
Well, it's very good to refer to it as an ad in the sense that I agree that it's actually one of the early large-scale advertising campaigns that was ever done. Now, to undertake that activity, in and itself, you can see there was a fair amount of organization involved to be able to just do that. In terms of Bacon, what is helpful to look at here is I have a background in architectural history and art history. I have a strong sense of scholarly historical documentation for so forth. One way to look at it is in terms of the a traditional history, and then also a history in which one can find readily available documents. There are various manuscripts that the order have that aren't so generally available that assist us. Also, there's a certain amount of tradition that comes down to us. Francis Bacon, for example, and there's various ways this is just described and hinted at in his writings and so forth, was a chief executive officer of the Rosicrucian order. We use the term imperator, which comes from the Latin, of course, for emperor, but we don't use it in the strict sense of an emperor, but sort of one who's a chief officer and a very wise person with great ability in administration. There are various persons that did contact the order at that time, but as the documents refer to, like the Fama Fraternitatis and others, there had to be a fair amount of worthiness to make the contact. The students were on the lookout. Another thing that can make it challenging for persons like the historians that you referred to, such as Francis Yates, that the order has traditionally operated in a 108-year cycle, where it's more outwardly active, and then it has a more behind-the-scenes period of 108 years, a total cycle of 216 years, where there's traditions passed through family and certain those who are in intimate contact with Rosicrucians, but not as advertised or as well known. Also, part of the challenge is in the past that some things had to be done more privately because there was Inquisition in various ways, or a great deal of prejudice against sort of advanced learning. Also, another thing in regard to the traditional history is that you can see the Rosicrucian order views itself not only in that history you're talking about in terms of the early 1600s, where it was making itself well known throughout Europe. It also views itself as drawing on the earlier traditions of the Gnostics, of the Essenes, of the earlier alchemists, of the Neoplatonists, and others that I can mention. And an important part of this takes firsthand experience to come into, and this is where mysticism is so important in direct experience, is that you can look at the Rosicrucian order as a current of wisdom and energy that's passed, because the Rosicrucian order, one important part of it as a school is it's an initiatic organization. There's a direct passing of knowledge and wisdom that flows down through the generations and ages.
Maybe we should let's try to backtrack and put about 2 to 3 minutes into explaining if the average person decides to become interested in Rosicrucianism. What are they going to do? What sort of stuff do they learn? What's the general philosophy of the Order of the Rosy Cross that might clarify it for the general public?
Okay. Well, as a school of mysticism, what it emphasizes is the direct experience of reality, of divine things, not to believe them, but to emphasize your personal experience. Now, many exercises are introduced in the weekly lessons. The central one is meditation. So there's an opportunity there not just to think about these things or feel about these things, but to go deeper within oneself, to experience the God within, or what Rosicrucian terminology referred to is the master within. And if one learns if there's important questions in one's life that one's trying to get answers for, you may have studied in books and you may have tried to think it through in one's outer reasoning, that you can appeal to the God within or the master within in meditation. So the meditation is not only meant for general enlightenment and well-being, but also get answers to specific questions. It may come during the period of meditation or may come at other times during the day, because the outer mind needs to have inner things revealed to it in symbols and clothes and things associated with the senses. In the teachings, you're going to have a broad range of natural and spiritual laws. And one of the important exercises that you'll learn is on visualization. Now, many organizations will teach some of the things I'm talking about. In the Rosicrucian order, you'll have them all together in a very balanced way. Often those organizations have been started through persons that have had some contact with the Rosicrucians, and they've wanted to specialize on a particular topic like past life regression or on visualization. With the order, you get a very balanced approach. You'll learn about methods of healing through contact and energies in the body. You'll learn about the psychic centers and how the vital life force flows through the body and how that can be used in healing for oneself and contacting with others, but also healing at a distance, which we also call metaphysical aid or absent healing. You'll also, in the visualization I mentioned, that's something that's can be used for very practical ends, for things that are needed in one's environments and in one's relationships, and how to visualize properly and release properly into the subconscious. One will also learn about the structure of mind and how the 5 physical senses have a parallel with the 5 psychic senses, and also the psychic centers in the body, these great transformer stations that relate the spiritual or divine to our what we could refer to as our psychic nature, and how that relates to our emotional nature. We'll go over the history of philosophy. You'll learn various things about, even though we're not a religion, we do talk about history of religion and spirituality, and maybe it's inspired teachers. There's regular experiments and lessons that go on in addition to visualization and meditation that are central. There's a variety of things that prove things to oneself, to do a psychic phenomenon, and how to direct that for one's well-being and one's well-being of others. The mystical experiences I talked about, that those are encouraged through meditation. One of the ways to look at this is that, just as we think about as we grow up, but we're in our early 20s, we become adults, may even be legally recognized. So we still have a great deal of growing up or maturing or spiritually evolving to do. And all the lessons are intended to guide us in that. And it can be done also through affiliate bodies. If you wish, that's optional. That you can go out and meet others, and you have lessons, and there's initiations. There's a degree system that's worked through that has successive stages of learning and spiritual development.
Sure. So
those are some of the things that we deal with.
Sure. So if I may paraphrase, and let me tell me if I've got this right.
Okay.
The Rosicrucianism I'm hearing you describe is basically a sort of a step-by-step process for perfecting the self.
Yes.
Okay. And it's a little bit similar to Freemasonry in at least that regard, because some people, I give a lot of talks and tours, and people always ask me, what are Freemasons? And, where do you begin, So I usually say, or I usually tell them, look, I don't think these guys are trying to take over the world. I think they're trying to be the best you can be, is pretty much, because they're about development personally, emotionally, spiritually. And so instead of, I guess I might add that what might set Rosicrucianism apart from any other kind of a transformative process is that there's a very old pipeline of wisdom that you guys are using. And there's a lot of symbols and imagery and code words. Am I correct about that? I mean, Rosy Cross is a...
Yes, there is.
Okay, good, great. So, wow.
I can also mention...
I'm really proud of myself. So keep going.
No, you know a great deal on these matters, Mason, I know. I can also mention, in regard to the Freemasonry and its relationship with the Rosicrucian Order, in the early 1700s, there was a close relationship. There were certain Rosicrucians that wanted to bring to the world an organization that would be thoughtful and highly developing of morality, and would have a degree of spirituality with it. And they formed the Freemasonry. And I know Rosicrucians who are Freemasons and vice versa. Today, though, they're independent organizations. However, the Rosicrucian Order greatly respects all spiritual traditions. In Freemasonry, there's a strong emphasis on morality. That's in the Rosicrucian Order. But in the Rosicrucian Order, we have even stronger emphasis on development of spirituality, in which morality foundation has to be built on. So there's even more in the Rosicrucian Order in terms of detailed spiritual teachings, and detailed spiritual exercises such as meditation are far more emphasized. But they're harmonious in nature.
Sure. So you, Hugh, you suspect that maybe the Rosicrucianism preceded formal Freemasonry.
Yes. Now, it's true that there's a traditional history of Freemasonry in regard to the guild system of Masons, which ties into my doctoral work, actually, when I studied medieval cathedrals and what were the purpose and symbolism of cathedrals, that the Freemasons drew on that earlier forms of, some would call the practical masonry, earlier forms of Masonic organizations that were part of guilds, they did have a deep spiritual aspect. They were often had a patron saint with them, and they were associated with religious traditions, as the crass traditions in general did. But yes, the traditional histories, yes, both will go back to ancient Egypt and the building of the pyramids and initiations in the Great Pyramids. Rosicrucian particularly emphasizes Akhenaten, a very inspired leader and pharaoh of ancient Egypt, that helped introduce the concept of monotheism. But our spiritual teachings, that current, I would say, is strictly older in the sense that you can follow it through the medieval alchemists, the Neoplatonists, the inspired Islamic scholars that were in Spain. There were mystics, the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, the Therapeutae and the Essenes that the Master Jesus worked with, and going back to many of these Greek philosophers and the Master Jesus going to Egypt to learn in the mystery schools there and the Gnosis there.
Sure. So I get it, and frankly, what you're saying is sort of what I'd taken for granted, really, that there is an ancient school of wisdom, and that the practitioners may change their names, but this foundation, the Hermetic Kabbalist tradition, is pretty much still with us. And yes. I often tell people that on my talks and tours that people who are interested in one mystical system are very often interested in several. Yes. And that just because you see some of these hot button symbols, for instance, the rose and the cross, or the eye in the pyramid, or yes. the winged sun, or some of these famous symbols, it's not a dead giveaway of which group the individual was drawing from, because they all draw from similar imagery. Am I correct about that?
Yes, that's true. I mean, there's particular symbols that are like the rose on the cross is particularly a Rosicrucian symbol, but various groups that have had some Rosicrucian affiliation or have modeled themselves after Rosicrucians have used that symbol. And maybe I can, the rose there is the idea that the unfolding of the deeper personality. The Rosicrucian tradition would call a soul personality, but it's through suffering, but also we view the cross as two polarities that have come together to form a perfect creation. Everything that manifests in the world is through positive or negative polarities, like we'll see in electricity, or we'll see, the two poles, the man and the woman, come together to form the new creation of the child. And these are some of the symbolism of the rose or the rosy cross. I can mention that in the Rosicrucian traditions, that we study many of this world's spiritual traditions, and in some sense, the Rosicrucian tradition is universal in that sense.
Hey, we've got about 2 minutes, and I want to give you a couple of short answer questions here. I'm going to name some names, and I'd like you to tell me whether you think they either were Rosicrucians or were influenced by Rosicrucian style philosophy. Okay. Here's name number one: William Shakespeare.
I would say tremendously so, and I think possibly have in mind as well as in the Rosicrucian tradition, we would view that Sir Francis Bacon was intimately associated with the writing of the Shakespearean documents. So you can find, and as we know, we talk about Frances Yates, she takes this up as well, as that you can find that the profound Kabbalistic teachings and mystical teachings in the Shakespearean play. So yes, very much so.
Okay. Thomas Jefferson.
Yes, our archives are to the effect that yes, he was a Rosicrucian, and he was very much falling in the tradition that Francis Bacon discussed in his book New Atlantis.
We have 1 minute. Ben Franklin, yes or no?
Very much a profound Rosicrucian. He's one of the spiritual masters of America. You can see a very practical, but very lofty personality. And he was initiated in the Rosicrucian traditions and had contact with the early Rosicrucians that were around the Wissahickon Creek.
I may have another name for you, but I hear our credits fading in. Thank you, Professor. Give me a yes or no answer here. John Adams.
I'm quite possibly. I'm not sure. Many of those early patriots were Rosicrucians as well as Freemasons.
Fantastic, Hugh. Hugh, we have to take about a 5-minute break here, and we will be back with our esteemed guest, Dr. Hugh McCague, on Twilight on the Western Door.
You're listening to Go Podcast Yourself Network.
Let's go check it out
At gopodcastyourself.com. And we love you.
Yes, this is Mason Winfield, the host of Twilight on the Western Door, coming back after our break with our esteemed guest, Dr. Hugh McCague. And the subject of our discussion today is the Invisible College of the Rosy Cross, a study of the Rosicrucian order. And we have the fine scholar, Dr. Hugh McCague, with us today. And on the heels of our earlier discussion, I have to start getting close to the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And the reason I say that is because our show is being broadcast from our offices in East Aurora. They are on the campus of East Aurora's historic Roycroft Inn. And there's quite a few indications that Elbert Hubbard, the esteemed founder of the Roycroft Campus and community, had interest in occultism, and possibly most specifically with the Rosicrucians. And that's sort of what I'd like to address with Dr. Hugh right now. Hugh, you're with us?
Yeah, sure am.
How do you react to someone saying, well, suppose somebody says Elbert Hubbard was not a Rosicrucian. How do you convince them that he was?
I think there's a variety of ways. One is that, in its most essential sense, is if you look at Elbert Hubbard's writings and also Alice Hubbard's writings too, you'll certainly see someone, if you understand mysticism or in the spirituality, as we've been defining, you can see that they're very much interested in such things. For example, Elbert Hubbard wrote about cosmic consciousness. That's a central topic in the Rosicrucian teachings. He talks about eternity as now. This is a fundamental mystical teaching, and it's not just an idea or a thought. It's an actual experience, and it's an astonishing experience. You can see in going through various ideas and laws and principles of Rosicrucians that they're matching up remarkably well. So you can see it's very much writing in a Rosicrucian spirit. In terms of historical documentation, I mean, there's various documentation from persons who are Rosicrucians talking about their contact with Alice and Elbert Hubbard, about letters they received from them, about things that Elbert said about the Rosicrucian order. And I think a lot more of that could come out in terms of archives and so forth. That
sure. It sounds like you're getting close to what I've been looking for a long time, the smoking gun.
Yeah.
Because, the signs that Elbert, and we can talk about this in a minute, but just for now, I had never really found any direct documentation in any sort that Elbert Hubbard and the Rosicrucians had connection. I saw assertions that were made after his death.
Yes.
And, that I don't consider the smoking gun. And incidentally, my own perspective, I've got no problem with the likelihood that Elbert Hubbard had exposure to Rosicrucian thinking because so many of his friends did.
Yes.
And I think he probably also had exposure to theosophy, to Christian Science, to spiritualism.
Yes.
And Freemasonry. I mean, the Masonic historian of Buffalo believed that Elbert Hubbard was a Freemason. And I said to him, well, he's not on the list. Why do you think that? And he said, well, he's got all the signs of someone who had exposure to Freemasonry, but a lot of prominent people who were interested in it didn't want their name on the list. And so,
yes.
Do you see any signs here about the Roycroft campus in the architecture that would make use, or ornamentation, any physical things we could look at that to you, Hugh, would suggest Hubbard's interest in Rosicrucianism?
Yes, I can. And I can also, there's things that also in mysticism generally, certainly, the attraction to the use of the rose in its iconography, thinking of the glass windows in the Roycroft Inn, for example. Something that also sort of strikes me in a more indirect way is that the temple-like format. There's Tom Bojankowski's painting "Follow the Light," and the way he shows the entrance to what would originally were the earlier printing rooms, but now sort of one of the main portals into the Roycroft, and it's very much like a temple-like design. So that gives you a sense of there's certainly an interest there in having sort of a beautiful architectural expression, and one that's that is temple-like. I think a lot of the murals that are in the salon,
yes,
in a way, it reminds one inspired by the slightly earlier, by a few years, Salon de Rosecroix that was active with Rosicrucians in Paris, where you'd have readings and you'd have uplifting presentations in the arts and so forth. But the iconographic program up there, you could say not specifically Rosicrucian, but certainly a strong interest in human history and temples, various temples of the world, and human evolvement over time. A lot of the adages that are in the portals remind ones of the utopian tradition that's associated with the Rosicrucians, where you can have the ideal of the betterment of humanity, the utopia in the sense of giving spiritual direction to persons. I think there's in the writings that he did, there's various things that he said that make one think very much of the Rosicrucian tradition and how it operates. About the idea, for example, he talks about the adept converses only. The adept only converses as best with the adept. Around him is a sacred circle, and with it only the elect are allowed to enter. And this brotherhood of consecrated lives admits only those who are worthy. All those who are excluded exclude themselves. That's something that's very much in the Rosicrucian tradition. There are things that people have said that shortly after his passing that could be checked out more, and I think ultimately they can be, in terms of there was documentation from the early cycle of this activity of the Rosicrucian order dating from 1909 to 1915, where we could see if we could actually see his name mentioned or signature in any of the communications. There are things that the person said that they said that I would say are very reliable sources in terms of being very actively involved with the psychical research in New York State, which I can mention more about. But
an obscure society. That I think, wasn't Spencer Lewis in that?
Yes, I mean, from 1904 to 1909, there was the New York Psychical Research Society, and Dr. A. Spencer Lewis says that Alice and Albert were very active participants in that, and even Albert as an officer. And the name that was also used for that was the Rosicrucian Research Society. After Dr. H. Spencer Lewis went to France and was initiated in the Rosecroix, or the Rosicrucian order, and it's expressed in French language terms. They say Rosecroix. There was various documents brought back that Albert and Alice, he said, looked over, and they became members of that early Supreme Council. So there would be documentation on that I think some more detective work could find.
I actually went to the records of the New York, that society you described. I think it's been so long since I looked at this, but I went to the offices of the ASPR, the American Society for Psychical Research. Yes, and I went there looking for those things, and I've got to tell you, they directed me to the top floor, and the top floor is in worse shape than my garage. It's like piles of books and documents all over the place. It would have taken me years to go through it. So until somebody,
okay.
and there was this kind of old guy with gray hair. He looked like a Mad Max version of a professor, but he was going through it, and he wasn't moving too fast. So I think if there is
these great jewels of wisdom sometimes require great effort. Now, is it the case then that they do in fact have some archives from the New York Secular Research Society? Then I take.
Well, I'm not sure I'm not so sure archive is what I would call it. I think maybe box.
Another approach is
I think maybe I think maybe an emptied garbage can full of documents is what I'd call it. Just imagine filling up about 12 garbage cans with uncollected papers, and then hang them from the ceiling, then turn them all upside down at the same moment, and that's what this room looked like.
Hopefully it's all there, so to speak. Yeah.
Oh, I think it still is, but I don't think anyone's really had the money or the energy to archive it. Now, it would be wonderful to get some kind of a grant somehow and send somebody down there to do that, because I think a pretty good scholar who was willing to put in 40-hour weeks would probably get that thing organized, in reasonably short order. But in other words, I'm not going to find what I'm looking for in one long weekend in New York.
I've made some inquiries through the Rosicrucian Order, and I think it requires some more effort again in finding the right archive with some of the documents from H. Spencer Lewis.
Sure. Now, for the benefit of the listeners, Harvey Spencer Lewis was a precocious young man who was very young at the time he met Albert Hubbard.
Yes.
I corrected, yes. And Spencer Lewis, he was really a wunderkind, and he sort of was the American how should I put this? Maybe he was the reestablisher or the refounder of the revived Rosicrucian order, which tends to go underground for cycles of 108 years.
That's right, yes.
And the reason for the 108 is because that was reputed to be the lifespan of the archetypal founder of Rosicrucianism, Christian Rosicrucian, who may have been born right after the last Crusades, I think, 1307 or something, and he lived 108 years. And then he was buried in a 7-sided tomb.
Yes.
Rosicrucian. I always wonder if the 7 corners of the Ruskin Room Tower here at the Roycroft Inn might be a little tip of the hat towards that mystical 7-sided tomb.
I wonder that as well as I know, Mason, you and I have talked about the early Rosicrucians who were in along the Wissahickon Creek in old Germantown that became later Philadelphia. They had a tabernacle in the wilderness that has some architectural parallels to that same tower.
Yeah, and I've never been there. I'll have to go take a look at that. But you can probably haul up the images online.
You can. It's not no longer standing. There's the foundations that archaeologists have dug up and examined, and there's some descriptions of them you can find online as well.
Now, aren't there? Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there 2 prominent American Rosicrucian groups today? I mean, AMORC is not the only one.
There's no others that are nearly as prominent as the Rosicrucian Order. There are other Rosicrucian organizations operating. The name gets used widely. There's only one Rosicrucian Order, AMORC. The authenticity of organizations can vary in terms of their actual connections with the Rosicrucian tradition over the millennia, and centuries. But the Rosicrucian Order is quite tolerant of people who take various approaches to growth and spirituality and do what's best for themselves.
Sure. Now, I've heard a theory that the name Rosicrucian might actually not mean Rosy Cross. I think, I can't remember the scholar who proposed this, but he had a kind of an ingenious theory that it might actually mean the dewy cross, as in the morning dew. You ever heard that? And
yes, I have. That's my understanding. That is not correct. Is not correct. It's ingenious, and I know that dew is very important in alchemy, and there's various insights from the Rosicrucian Order about dew. But no, I wouldn't take that perspective specifically.
Do you see any? While we're talking about the Roycroft and Albert Hubbard, do you see any alchemy over here?
Um,
Put that red face on the chapel.
yes, that I know we've discussed its iconography before. It's yes, I would say some things you've pointed out in regard to it, I think could be quite apt. I'm intrigued about it as well in terms of the importance of certain alchemical symbols such as the sun. In the broad sense, you could view the Roycroft as an alchemical tradition in alchemy can be used not only for the physical alchemy of distillation and transmutation, but the idea of transmutation meaning bettering, evolving ourselves, the idea of taking raw materials and refining them into something fine and beautiful, that is essentially alchemy as well. And the way that the Roycroft tradition of the school of life and the development of one's higher self or one's spiritual self is a spiritual alchemy in the broad sense.
Cool. When you were referring a little bit to some of Elbert Hubbard's writings about growth and inspiration, I was really hearing Harvey Spencer Lewis. I was really hearing a lot of. I think Spencer Lewis could have been very influential on Elbert Hubbard.
Yes, I think very much. I think very much so. And I know that H. Spencer Lewis talked about how inspirational Elbert Hubbard is, and that he recommended that people, if they haven't had exposure to him, to read him for great spiritual nourishment. And H. Spencer Lewis predicted that over the coming decades and centuries, that his writings would become much more recognized and revived. And I think in a way that's happened with the Roycroft Renaissance.
I think it would be interesting if the literary establishment, ever took Elbert Hubbard into its good graces.
Yes.
I don't say that because he was a total no-hoper. I just say that because, I don't know, you can so quickly fall afoul of the establishment, and Elbert Hubbard managed, yeah. Keep going.
I was just going to say that one thing that's really striking to me about Elbert Hubbard's writing, and Alice's as well, is I'm just looking at it in terms of, my experiences in life and experience of cosmic consciousness. When I read his writings, I say, here's someone who's experienced cosmic consciousness. This is not just someone who's thinking these things. He's recording his experience. I mean, he was a very influential figure in his sphere, but I notice how much I don't view him as an egotistic figure, because I view him very much encouraging others and respectful of others. And he gives me a sense of someone who's really experienced quite deeply in life and has worked to apply it and bring it to fruition in his environment. All these things are emphasized by the Rosicrucian tradition.
Well, Elbert Hubbard was a self-made man, if there ever was one. I mean, this is a guy who he was like the Great Gatsby, he invented himself. And,
exactly.
And people who kind of don't like that, are going to, when they're in a fight, they're going to hit you with any club they can bring to hand, Hey,
for sure. I can mention too that we've talked about H. Spencer Lewis and Elbert Hubbard and some other Rosicrucians. Ultimately, each person has their own unique way of taking up spirituality, or it's the Rosicrucian tradition, and each of us in a way becomes the tradition. These things become firsthand knowledge and application in our lives, and they're not just beliefs or things we might have faith in.
Sure. Well, I have always been a strong believer that without information, the mind, it doesn't play well. I think the greatest art is created not by people who've got great feeling, but by people who've got great feeling and great technique and great exposure to other arts and disciplines. And it's
very much so.
Part of the reason that when I taught, I resisted some of the tendencies coming over education to try to, I don't know if dumbing down the curriculum is the word, but watering it down. I thought the best way for my students to progress was giving them as much good, talented material as possible. And I think what I'm getting at is that I think one of the focuses of Rosicrucianism is this beautiful imagery, all the symbols and the shapes and the forms and the concepts and the imagery that that is used, and these, I think, are focuses for the mind, focuses for the imagination, and I think that's one of the things I've admired about Rosicrucianism for quite a long time.
Yeah, that's very much been my experience, and why I was greatly attracted to it, and that it allowed, like myself. Well, yes, it was more personal. Yes, as a mathematician and very strong interest in the sciences, but I have a love of the arts and how they come and how these things relate deeply in a spiritual way. And I found that all these things were being drawn out in the spiritual teachings of the Rosicrucians, and also was learning from the lessons. I could see people that had very deep firsthand experience just reading the lessons of the weekly monographs. That in itself was a very uplifting experience, a very encouraging one, and it gave me a lot more sense of the meaning and purpose of living, and something that I was forming and constructing within myself.
I'm sure you've seen the Rose poems by William Butler Yeats.
Yes.
The rose upon the root of time. I mean, if that isn't a Rosicrucian poem, I mean, a root is a cross.
Yes.
So the rose upon the cross of time. I mean, did you ever hear any suggestions that Yeats might have been a Rosicrucian?
No, but he was certainly influenced by organizations and people that were greatly associated with the Rosicrucians.
The Order of the Golden Dawn.
Yes, they're not. It's not a Rosicrucian organization, but a lot of things that they knew about were associated with earlier Rosicrucians, definitely. And very inspiring figure. His brother's a very inspiring painter as well. And
the rose as a literary symbol, I mean, it's been around a long time. I mean, Yeats probably took it to the top, but I mean, I think before that, Dante used the rose, so. And I think St. Augustine. In other words, they used the rose as a symbol of spiritual purity, the pure heart. Very cool.
Yeah, the Rose of Sharon, and even in ancient Egypt, the rose was used as well as the lotus. And Elizabeth I, the rose, the Tudor rose, very important in their association with John Dee and other Rosicrucians.
You believe John Dee, the Queen Elizabeth's astrologer? You believe John Dee was an early Rosicrucian? Yes,
very much. So you could say he was one of the august masters of our order, and he was a person that had my profound contact and tutelage with another genius, Francis Bacon, that we spoke of earlier.
What do you think about Frederick of the Rhine, the alleged Rosicrucian king? The Battle of the White Mountain, that short-lived community in Germany.
Yes, he's one along with Elizabeth I and you could say Charlemagne in earlier times as well, that were in certain respects inspired leaders that greatly encouraged to have around them a group not only of intellectuals but persons that had deep spiritual and esoteric and Rosicrucian connections, similar to the Medicis and the Platonic Academy and Neoplatonic Academy in Renaissance Florence.
That was a time in history when they thought that that successful people ought to also be practiced in the arts and in philosophy. And I don't know where that standard went, because, I meet so many people who are very successful in life, and then they'll make a joke, in literature, I'm a dummy, or something like that. And I'm thinking, well, heck, wait a minute, let's try to find a little support for this, You're
right. With the rise of materialism, there's been a strong emphasis on specialization. But in terms of getting the meaning and purpose of life, it has to be integrative. And that's certainly where I'd see, the Rosicrucian traditions, things that you do in your great work and the Roycroft Renaissance are working to bring back. Hey,
this is a nice place. They're doing a lot of great stuff up here. Just keeping this magnificent campus here for everyone.
Yeah,
hey,
definitely.
Let me make an analogy here. This is another 800-pound gorilla. You're probably going to get mad at me, but here goes.
That's fine.
Yeah, fine for you to get mad at me, sure. You know how there's the old stereotype that the church may have had some infiltration by Satanism. And when Adam Weishaupt set out to create his conspiracy called the Illuminati, he began by infiltrating Masonic lodges. Do you suspect that Rosicrucianism may have been infiltrated, or that it may have any connections to some unsavory political purposes?
There's, persons that are carefully considered in terms of their motives, in terms of becoming affiliated with the Rosicrucian order. Also, the teachings themselves are a fire that burned brightly, and a crucible that one has to pass through that often will repel people that don't have the best intentions. The Illuminati you're referring to that are in history, they are Illuminati, but they're not the true. I think you're well aware, they're not the true Illuminati. Sometimes they'll hear about Illuminati and they'll try to model themselves after that. But the Illuminati are a group of advanced workers within the Rosicrucian order, and they've been that through centuries, well before that particular individual.
Yeah, I mean, Illuminati has become such a buzzword, but it's sort of a term like Animals or something. It's like
yes.
The Animals is a band.
Yes.
Animals is a generic category, and Illuminati is a generic category.
At best, these sort of outer things draw people to more serious inquiry as to the inner meaning.
While I have you, do you believe in the existence of a secret, occult, nefarious conspiracy, something that might answer the Illuminati or the Trilaterals or the Bilderbergers? Or do you think there's anything going on back there that's got an occult basis that we ought to know about?
I think certainly not within the Rosicrucian order, but in terms of, there are persons that get fascinated in a sort of a selfish way, but they really can't go very far with things because you have to go deeper into the infinite. The selfish is always finite. So there are people that are trying various things, and there are various organizations that are groups that will try to have great material power. Ultimately, it's not satisfying or particularly meaningful, though.
I occasionally get asked questions about occult conspiracy, and I've done a little digging into it. And to me, it's hard enough to keep any kind of a secret, much less like a 2,000 year. It's really, Dennis Hastert and 3.5 million couldn't keep a secret for 20 years.
Yes.
It's hard enough to keep a normal secret. That how you'd really keep a secret conspiracy going. And I've read enough of the literature where people will kind of, they'll like have this Inspector Clouseau, interrogation. Well, Ben Franklin was in Paris in 1784. Fact. The French Revolution, the fall of the Bastille, 1784. Fact. Therefore, Ben Franklin, and
yeah, sure.
Yeah, the fact that these are coincidences, they've got to be significant ones. They've got to. Just because two guys had dinner in the same German town in the same year doesn't mean that they're both Illuminati,
Yes.
So I do have to crack up a little bit. Hey, do you think, while I've got you, one of the things that overlaps with conspiracy theory, believe it or not, is the UFO syndrome. Mm-hmm. It's become big business these days. Do you think there's any connection at all between occultism, human conspiracy, and the UFO business? I've never heard you speak of UFOs, but I just figured I'd shoot that one at you.
I think that when one's trying to understand consciousness more deeply, one becomes aware that yes, you can think of intelligence as imbued throughout the universe. It's a deep experience that we can have. So that's quite possible. There are other sentient beings throughout the cosmos. In terms of connection with UFO phenomena, certainly, there is a relationship with psychic phenomena, for example, and one needs to be open that of sentient beings throughout the universe, as well as evolved spiritual beings that may be not only on this planet but elsewhere, as well as in higher spiritual planes.
Wow. Hugh, it's been absolutely fantastic to be able to chat with you. We've got about 30 or 40 seconds for you to do a little wrap-up if there's anything you'd like to say to our listeners.
Sure. In our talking together, our connection was through Kitty Turgeon. So I know she's a very dear friend of us both, and recently passed through transition or passed away. And so thinking very much of her in regard to this interview. And I think the Roycroft is a very inspiring place for people to visit. And I encourage people, if they're inclined to in spirituality, if they may be interested in the Rosicrucian tradition, they can look it up through the Rosicrucian.org website. Whatever tradition one wishes to proceed, the most important thing is one's first-hand experience with in-depth knowledge, and you'll find that there is a perfect way through life, and there's tremendous meaning and well-being and love that one can radiate to others.
Thank you, Hugh. This program has been in honor of our dear friend Kitty, and the next time you're in East Aurora, we'll drink a little toast for her. For now, I hear our very mysterious and entrancing closing credits fading in, for which we thank the Afro-Celt Sound System, a Scottish-African fusion band that we admire so much. Their music sounds like what we mean, mood merging and mysticism. We thank them for their work as we thank Chris Starr, Carolyn Smith, and the whole GPY radio network. Most of all, we thank our revered guest, Dr. Hugh McCague. You can contact Hugh for speaking events through my website, through our Facebook page, Twilight on the Western Door. We'll put you right in touch with him. Otherwise, until we meet again, shine in that light whose smile kindles the universe. Work every day to make this a better world. Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you very much, Mason. Great work. Thank you.